right, let me get that. Okay.
Because I got this timer, but if I just put it on silent, does that mean nothing's gonna happen?
I should put my phone on silent. I didn't do that yet.
Yeah, I think.
I got mine silent.
Yeah, I tried
I think it's only okay if the battery is fine. We the panelists. No. Yeah, I think you're probably.
Yeah. I'm actually a feet of a different drummer. Yeah, that's science. I think it's my skills background. I'm sorry. Very usually. You go. I get nervous, I get anxious. I'm going to do the same thing.
Good afternoon. Welcome to UFO Scene and ET's Heard. I'm Charles Mary Kubricht, and I thank you for being here at Kirk Hopper Fine Art Gallery and for watching this event being live streamed on the gallery YouTube channel and on Daniel Jones's YouTube channel, The Vortex. It is being recorded and will be available for you to review and share. Thank you, Kirk Hopper, Susie Khalil, and Natasha Wilson, for providing the encouragement, the hard work, and the exhibition space to present this panel of rock stars of the UFO community. I'm deeply indebted to the panelists here who often speak to audience of 3,000 plus people. Here they are speaking to 40 earthlings surrounded by artwork representing my visions of outer space. Their intense investigations and intellectual curiosity into what dwells beyond perception, reality, and the deepest mysteries of what it means to be human truly inspires and motivates me to create. Thank you, all of you. The timing cannot be better. Yesterday, the Director of National Intelligence released a UFO report to the public. I know the panelists, each a UFO specialist, are looking forward to sharing with you their opinions and reflections about the Pentagon report, along with their own research into and experiences of UFO phenomena. I have always believed in UFOs and extraterrestrials. Scientists are beginning to speak openly about visitations and the possibility that non-human intelligence exists in the universe. Through powerful telescopes on Earth and in outer space, astronomers and astrophysicists have identified water on exoplanets outside of our solar system. Exoplanets are Earth-like planets orbiting stars such as our star, the Sun. It is only a matter of time until the same scientists will start searching for pollution on exoplanets, confirming the existence of technology created by non-human intelligences. In the meantime, military personnel, politicians, astronauts, and citizens around the globe collect data on sightings, crash sites, and encounters with UFOs and extraterrestrials. May I introduce the professionals at the forefront of their careers who have bravely spoken out when speaking.
Sorry about that.
When speaking out, that was speaking out, let's say. when speaking out often was not as well received as it is now. The first speaker is Sharon Komar. She is a filmmaker and ufologist researcher living in Dallas, Texas. She graduated with a BFA from the University of Texas. For over 12 years, Sharon filmed interviews about people's experiences with UFOs and extraterrestrials. For 3 years, she was the MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, Dallas-Fort Worth Assistant Coordinator. Komorn co-produces and co-directs Alien Experiencers with Bob Tulay of Dallas, Texas. Her focus is on the transpersonal experiences of abductees affected by extraterrestrial contact, leaning heavily on the work of the late Dr. John Mack, head of the School of Psychiatry at Harvard University, and the relevancy she describes to the experiencers whom she interviews. And here's Sharon. She will be showing a trailer to her new documentary and will then speak. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Charles Mary Kubricht, and thank you for giving us this beautiful setting of your magnificent artwork. And thank you, Kurt Hopper Galleries, for making this event possible for us. We are at a very historic point in our history as humanity. And the recent disclosure documents that have been brought forward from both the Advanced Area Space Threat Identification Program and the UAP Task Force have made us understand that there is a willingness to not have such covert activity define us. And there will be, from this day forward, more transparency as we understand it from both of our military and our different armed forces committees. So this is a very historic event, and it may be the beginning of a 10-year slow drip disclosure for all of us, not just in the United States, but globally. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe knowing too much at one time may be very disruptive for us. But we as humanity have to realize that we are not just defined by what our military and our politicians deliver to us. It is our journey. It is our ability to be pioneers and to explore and to find out what our identity is in this universe. Would you like to start the trailer, Charles Mary, for the documentary? Myself and Robert Tullier have created a documentary. It's titled Alien Experiencers. And our goal has been to let persons who have had contact and abductions have a place to tell their stories. And we have created a very special vetting process for the persons who tell their stories. And you will soon meet Velez and Terry Lovelace, Daniel Allen Jones, and every one of us have been with the idea that we can understand our identity as humanity by understanding some of the stories of persons who have pushed further than most people have. So there's a large amount of people who have had contact and abductions. The Roper poll back in 1994 interviewed, it was 1991, 92, interviewed 6,000 Americans, and with the percentages they had, at that point, were able to more or less surmise that at least 3.5 million Americans had experienced abductions. So that was 1991, we're talking, 32 years later, 30 years later. And so you can imagine how many people are experiencing this now. At any rate, here's a trailer to our documentary, Alien Experiences. We're not having audio for this.
Les,
Matt, we're not getting audio.
No audio. Okay, 1 second. Sharon, if you want to just talk first. Did you want any of the other slides before you?
No. Just this trailer, that you can show slides there. See why the UAP task force also did a big pitch in their report for funding because of needing more advanced technology so we can identify these unidentified aerial phenomena even better. It's always technology. Yes.
The unimaginable.
In my earlier abductions, I had great fear.
Real stories.
It had a tail, and the tail was probably a foot long.
Real people.
And it came down through the trees like a ball, bouncing downstairs.
First-hand accounts.
We're incredible beings, and we aren't the only ones in the universe.
Here now with those who are true alien experiencers.
We were having a summer vacation at Fort Hancock, Texas, with my grandparents. Grandpa owned the only gas station within 50 miles of El Paso. We all headed towards the storage room. The room was full of sunlight because it had windows at the very tops of the ceiling. And it also illuminated what was in this jar.
1973, I was living in an upstairs apartment. All of a sudden, brilliant light shines through the drapes. And I thought, well, what is that? And I went to the window and pulled the drape aside. And I was surrounded by 5 little beings.
As a journalist for almost 50 years, I have talked to too many police officers, air traffic controllers, pilots, both military and commercial, military officers, people who have had high security clearances, and when they all tell you the same story, and they're consistent, and they all match, then you come to the understanding that yes, all of this is very real. It had some human features. It was a bluish white, creepy almond eyes, but the eyes were dark blue.
I was on a very cold, thin metal table, and this voice, which was very monotoned, said to me, "Jane, it is your time to come."
when we do have people that are abducted or that are going through a process and have no clue on how to deal with any of that guilt or the shame or the embarrassment or people being called crazy, that has been an intentional setup, so to speak, so that nothing could be disclosed up to this point.
It's an aspect of our world and that does not affect most people on a day-to-day basis, but nevertheless, this is happening and it's real.
Thank you for watching this. Our biggest joy has been working with the experiencers, persons who have had contact. And many of these experiencers have been abducted. And Dr. John Mack, who I consider a seminal person to study. He was the head of the School of Psychiatry at Harvard. He has passed in 2007, I believe. He was hit by a drunk driver in London. But he has done more for understanding the alien abduction phenomenon than anyone else. And I think anyone who is curious about this aspect of ufology would do well to study his work. One thing I have to say in terms of interviewing persons and filming them, and Carrie Lovelace is an abductee lifetime, and we filmed his story, and as well as Jane Nelms, who you saw there, Annie G, and Jim Wittenberger. I have to say that in assessing persons to tell, relate their stories to the public, we have used a serious set of guidelines because we weren't there. We're taking their word for their story. And we have relied on organizations like Velez's Opus, Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. And they have provided us, along with the pioneers of Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and the wonderful Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who has been in phone communication with me all the way. They have provided us with the telltale signs that yes, you may have been abducted. And so missing time is a huge one. Of course, Dr. John Mack and also wonderful Kathleen Martin with Buffon. They have all provided us with the flags to look for. And missing time, scoop marks, or certain types of marks on your body, in the roof of your mouth, different aspects that we look for. And actually, Les's organization has provided us over 100 signs to look for. So as I interview someone and I hear their stories, I look for those signs, those little green flags. And if I get enough of them, I feel like this story may have what I call plausible authenticity. That's about as close as I can get to truth on a story that I can't validate physically in any way. And with that plausible authenticity, then we assess the story itself and see if we can't do a good job interviewing the person who went through the experience, as well as try to do some reenactments so that everyone can kind of get a feeling for what they have been through. I have to say, in the persons I have interviewed, if ETs and we're told there are many, many, you know, there were 60 that were supposedly identified, 60 species supposedly identified in the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado in their physics book in the 1980s. And John Lear, of the Lear family jets, and he flew for the CIA, he has written about this. So that they've since expunged it from the physics book, but they talked about 60 species that we knew of then. And I've actually heard the great, wonderful Linda Mouton Howe speak about 360 species that we are knowledgeable of and maybe are interacting with. So that's out there. I can't prove any of it, but this is what I'm hearing from who I consider reputable sources. But if those species are interested in human DNA, human blood, human reproductive material, then I have to say they could pick some pretty darn great humans to choose from. I don't think I have interviewed one abductee that did not take a piece of my heart with them. They have been some of the most compassionate, intelligent, kind, good-hearted, caring human beings I have ever run across. So it is a rather difficult aspect of the human abduction phenomenon that some of our blood and DNA and reproductive material are taken from us without our consent or will, and that is a very fearful and awful aspect. But I have to say that they are making some very excellent choices in who they choose. I've been impressed myself. In discussing that, and I know that we are a UFO, we're in a UFO moment with what the government has decided to let us know, and Daniel and Terry are going to get a little deeper into that. But now we at least are in the other bin, that they call, and it's something that they cannot identify, and they don't believe it's debris or clutter or ice crystals or our U.S. military or Russia and China's U.S. military, who have half the military budget that the U.S. has. So then it goes to, and as they use the term in their report, other bin. And that's unexplained as of yet. So in that other bin, we do believe, because of reports from many millions of contactees and abductees, that there is contact going on with other species too. Whether they are flying these UFOs or not, maybe the UFOs are done by AI, we don't know. But there is contact going on also. So in my understanding of some ancient civilizations, and I've been reading Artie Sixkiller Clark's books, and she's a professor at the University of Montana, and she's gone into Middle America, Mesoamerica, and taken stories from ancient cultures. It seems that many cultures, for many millennium, have had these interactions. And they are not determined by whether a military or a political party allows them or declares them to be in existence. Humanity itself goes forward and makes those contacts and those interactions. Maybe I have another 5 minutes, I'm not sure. And Charles Mary, okay. Okay. I'll get into this very quickly. In my investigations, and I have to say, being with MUFON has made me a much better investigator and much better about getting hard facts when I can. And in my exploration of persons who have had contact, but especially persons who have been abducted. And John Mack made it very clear, to be an abductee, you have to have left the planet, you have to have been on a craft, and you have to have had interaction, close encounter of the fourth kind, basically. So a contactee, if someone's in their home and you have ET show up, that's one thing. Or if you're out in the woods and you have ET show up, that's one thing. But an actual abduction is another category. And I've come up with a Komorn 4 on that. And it is based on Dr. John Mack's work, and I'll go through all that briefly. The 4 stages, the first stage is absolute fear. Violation, people feel like they've been raped. And this is because of an alien hybriding program, and therefore our blood, our DNA, our reproductive materials are being taken and used without our permission. And that's a very fearful aspect. And I don't sugarcoat it. If the people I've interviewed have been kind enough to share their stories with me, I'm going to be honest enough to share that with you as it is. Now, there are 3 other stages that seem to occur. The second one is one of curiosity. Maybe you've been taken before. Maybe you know you're going to be returned back to your bedroom or your backyard or whatever. And you now identify, you can identify these beings that you're dealing with. And you become curious, and the fear has kind of subsided some, and you are allowing them to be with you, to communicate with you. The third stage we've identified is a stage of enhancement and enrichment. And many abductees describe that they've been taken around on a craft, maybe to see certain things. They describe being shown monitors with environmental issues happening on our planet, and what we better do, we better not drive on the wrong side of the road anymore and be kind to this planet. It's very, very special. So there's an educational process, and that educational process can only happen if you are on good terms with your educator. And then there's a fourth, and the fourth is a place of communion. And I think humans are wonderful. I think we're warm and funny and cozy, and we've got great senses of humor, and we know how to enjoy the beauty of life. And I can understand why any species would want to have a little of us. So there is some sort of gratitude that exists in that interplay of species. And many abductees and contactees describe a very blissful experience of communication and love, just very, very high, profound love. So those would be what I would consider the 4 stages. Not every abductee, contactee goes through all 4 of those stages, and sometimes it takes a period of time. There is a good organization here, Consciousness and Contact Research Institute. Ray Hernandez heads it. They've done a wonderful study with, let's see, I think it was 4,250 persons. I was part of their survey. And they found that people who had UFO ET contact would later maybe be more open to having paranormal, visitations or ESP or any other sort of paranormal activity open to them. And persons who had had paranormal activity end up being prone later to maybe having UFO ET contact. So that's a meshing. And also in his study, they found that persons who have had contact, and many of them have had a very rough stage in that first stage of fear, and that many of them have gone on later to develop a much more blissful relationship. So the negativity factor they came up with was about 20%, and 80% has develops into a positivity factor for them. So that's something to contemplate, and I don't think any of us should be afraid of contact. I think we should just understand that we'll have certain stages and phases to go through. So I hope you enjoy our documentary when we finally have it completed, and I thank you for this opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you, Sharon, so much, and I'm so glad that many of them end in love and blissfulness. That's great. That's a great way to put it. Our next speaker is Les Velez. He's a graduate of the University of Vermont with a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration. Beginning in September of 1970, Velez served in the U.S. Army as field artillery officer, and upon his honorable discharge, joined Buscombe Engineering, a Silicon Valley-based manufacturer's representative company, and was vice president until his retirement in 2017. Velez joined MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, in 1991. Velez joined and has held the following positions: field investigator, which is very important and that I'm interested in, training coordinator for field investigators, the assistant state director in Northern California, chairman of the AERC, abduction experiencer research committee, and team leader at the ART, abduction response team, and presented at the MUFON symposium in Denver. Also during this time, he became a facilitator for an abduction support group in San Jose, California, and in 1994 co-founded OPUS, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support. They help people who have experienced paranormal events. He has also appeared on multiple radio and local public access TV productions, and we're happy to have him here. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles Mary. Really appreciate you setting this up, and I know you put a lot of work into it, and we're very grateful. Thank you. So I was 11 years old, and this is when I was living in Connecticut, and I saw this object. It was a late October evening, and it was hovering over a tree line, and it scared the heck out of me. And I ran into the house, and by the time I convinced my father to come out, it was gone. And he said, oh, it's probably just a reflection off a cloud, of a light or something. And I didn't quite believe that. So I went to the library and picked up a few books on UFOs. And at that time, this is in the 50s, a gentleman by the name of George Adamski had written a couple of books about UFOs, and so I got into those books, and so the journey of understanding and trying to understand at least the UFO phenomena began for me. So, of course, life gets in the way. You get married, you have a couple of kids, and I eventually moved to California in 1985. And I had kind of forgotten about the whole UFO thing. And I picked up the San Jose Mercury News one day, and there was an article by Stanton Freeman, who was a well-known nuclear physicist that talks about UFOs. And he was going to be speaking at San Jose City College. Oh, thank you.
Is that better? Oh, yes.
Anyway, so he's going to talk about UFOs and a government cover-up. So I definitely was going to go to this presentation. and I expected to see a handful of people. Well, the auditorium was packed. There must have been like 300 people there. And so after that, in the lobby, MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, had a table, and they have a monthly journal. And so I decided, well, I've got to get this journal. And so I started reading the journal, and after a while, that was not enough for me. And as mentioned by Charles Mary, that I joined MUFON to get that journal, but also I became a field investigator. And this is where things got very interesting for me, because most of the cases that I got involved with not only were sightings, which was, at the time, MUFON was a very nuts and bolts type of an organization. They were not concerned so much with the abduction phenomenon. And so the cases turned out to also have abduction part that exhibited itself. And one of the cases, and I'll briefly talk about it, was a couple were in a state park near Santa Cruz, California. And they were coming out, it was dusk, and they noticed a light over the ocean. And this light got bigger and bigger and bigger until it was right over their head, and it turned out to be a triangular craft. And so this craft passed them into a canyon behind where they were standing, and they noticed another light over the ocean. And the second craft came in, and the first craft, they felt they were observing it. The second craft that came in, they felt it was observing them. So this happened 5 more times for a total of 7 craft that ended up in this canyon. And the part about the next part is very interesting, that these craft were sitting there doing this butterfly motion, and then all of a sudden they went up on their side, and it's like they went around the corner and disappeared, but there was no corner, of course, so they just dematerialized effectively. So anyway, they started to proceed out of the park, and there's a very steep incline, downgrade out of the park, and even during the day it's dark. I mean, it's a difficult path. Well, they felt that they were on automatic pilot, and the next thing they remember is they ended up at a restaurant in Pescadero, which is only like 5 or 10 minutes away, but they had 3 hours of missing time. So they came to the support group that I started to facilitate, because people asked me if I knew of other people that were having similar events in their lives, and I said, yes, I do. Well, they also developed a rash, and they took pictures of this rash. They had gone to one doctor, and the doctor couldn't figure out what it was, and then there was another doctor, and he couldn't figure out what it was. So anyway, they came to this meeting, and they showed the picture around, and without exception, almost everyone in the group had a similar rash at one time or another. And so one of the people said, well, I know what that's from. And so we all sat there with our mouths open, and we said, so what is it? Well, it's a reaction to the fluid that they dip you in when they bring you on board your craft to sanitize you. So anyway, more of the cases came about, more unbelievable cases just like that. And so this is like 92-3 time frame. And I have a doctor friend that was very interested in the phenomenon and wanted to know of other doctors that were interested so we could get together and talk about these issues. And we got contacted by a woman down in Carmel, California, that wanted to know what was going on with her brain when she was in contact with these off-earthly entities. And so the thing, when I heard this, I said, okay, that's interesting. I have no means to do that. And then I told my doctor friend that this woman was also working with an emergency room doctor in Carmel. And that got me interested, and also my doctor friend, Dr. Eugene Lipson, who has since passed away, unfortunately. But anyway, we came away from this meeting with the woman absolutely blown away. She had had a near-death experience, became very psychic, she was telling us things about ourselves that there was no possible way that she could understand what in the heck was going on in our lives, but she seemed to know quite a bit. So anyway, we came away from there saying to ourselves, how can we possibly help a person like this? And so we decided that it was necessary to develop an organization. And that was when OPUS, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support, was hatched. And we became a 501(c) nonprofit organization recognized by the IRS, which to me is always blows my mind. So that's when we really started to move things forward with the abductees. And as it turns out, I mean, our title says Paranormal Understanding and Support. We not only get involved with the abduction phenomena, other phenomena as well, but as it turns out, most of the cases that comes our way turn out to be abduction type cases. So anyway, after that, I finally started to get the interest of MUFON and understanding that you guys are a nuts and bolts type operation, but you also need to be looking at the abduction phenomena, because who better to talk to understand what this phenomenon is than the abductees, the people that are experiencing these entities, these non-human intelligences. So they finally let me take over, and I started the AERC, the Abduction Experiencer Research Committee. And while that organization was alive, because it's since been replaced, they funded a study. And we called the study the Omega-3 study, and I got a couple of psychologists involved. And we looked at 71 people that were felt that they had been abducted. Now we took a control group of 51 people. And I'm gonna read you the conclusion of what we found with these people, with the abductees. So in general, abductees experiencers profile differently than do their comparison counterparts on a number of general psychological and specific neurological variables. Yet there are remarkable similarities between the experiential group and the comparison group. It should be noted that in no case did experiencers or comparison group participants show any signs of mental illness or personality disorder. Fantasy proneness does not appear to play a differentiating role between the experiential and the control groups. However, sensitivity to alternative realities and early and recurrent paranormal or psi experiences seem to play a role in the abduction experience. Childhood conflict, psychosocial tension and abuse and trauma more than likely facilitate a dissociative coping style in later life. How much a part dissociation plays in the abduction experience remains an open question, but the ring and rosing abuse trauma dissociation pathway remains a viable descriptive, if not explanatory, principle. Both experience with and interest in the abduction phenomenon have impact on how one's body is perceived to function, how one views the world and one's purpose in it, and how one defines or redefines one's faith, traditions, and beliefs. In essence, both experience with and interest in contact seem to change one's sense of self and one's worldview. Abductee experiencers believe that there is a sentient, purposive, alien intelligence at play in their lives and at work in the world. What the intelligence's goals are seem to be more beneficent than benevolent, more benign than malignant. This, though, remains an open question and a point of doubt in the minds and hearts of some abductee experiencers and some comparison control participants. It also remains a point of contention among abduction researchers. The brain generally and the temporal lobe and limbic system more particularly play a mediating role in anomalous experiences such as abduction. There in no way, implies that abductions are all or only in the abductee's head. Rather, it points to the likelihood of temporal lobe ability that is open to change as a preset or precursor to extraordinary experiences. While it would be too reductionistic to claim that the brain creates such experiences, it is not far-fetched to think that the brain plays an important part in the who, the what of extraordinary experiences and how they are interpreted. So anyway, when we finally finished that study, we were going to start the next study called the Omega-4 study. How clever of us. And unfortunately, the psychologist that was the main investigator on the case had passed away. So I've been looking for somebody for quite a while, and I finally found someone that actually was involved with the free study, Russ Scalpone. And so what we've done this time is we've gone out to therapists and had them fill out a questionnaire with the fact that these people have had experience with abductees. And so then what we want to do after that is to go out to their clients and see what kind of information we get back from that. So we're trying to continue to go deeper and deeper into what is happening with the experiencers. So Opus, and I'll wrap this up, basically what we do is we have a referral network of therapists around the country. We also have an online support group that is totally confidential. We have over I think it's over 300 people now. We get 2 to 3 people a week contacting us looking to get into the support group. We have them from South Africa, Australia, the UK, South America, wherever. What it means is that these things are happening all over the world. And so we are trying to constantly come up with better ways of helping these people. Sometimes people come up with, they say they have implants and so they need a doctor, and I've been able to facilitate that for a few people where they've actually found something. And Dr. Roger Lear, who's unfortunately passed away. I keep talking about people passing away. What is that? But anyway, he was really instrumental in looking at implants, and some of the information that he put out there is remarkable. And I'll be coming out with a book here probably another month called The Unknown Other, an existential proposition of alien contact. And in there's about 17 different things that they found with these implants, and some of them transmit signals. So, and who are they transmitting to? So anyway, the bottom line is that we are not alone. These experiencers are not crazy, and we need to better understand how we can help them, but also help ourselves. Because again, this UAP task force report is one thing, but the next step, which will, I'm sure, eventually come, is to start the government really getting involved with the abductees. Thank you very much.
Our third presenter is Terry Lovelace. He is a 6-year veteran of the United States Air Force. He is a former Assistant Attorney General for the U.S. Territory of American Samoa, and also served as an Assistant Attorney General for the state of Vermont until his 2012 retirement in June 1977. Until his 2012 retirement. In June 1977, he and a friend were abducted from Velez State Park in northwest Arkansas while remote camping. They were both on active duty at the time. What followed were 40-plus years of nightmares, phobias, and PTSD-like symptoms. In 2012, a routine leg x-ray discovered 2 anomalous objects in his leg. That event was the catalyst to write the books and speak publicly about his experiences. In 2018, he self-published Incident at Devil's Den, a #1 bestseller on Amazon with 500 plus reviews at 4.6 to 5.0 approval, positive reviews. His second book, Devil's Den, The Reckoning, was published the week of Christmas 2020. It was the #1 bestseller in new releases immediately and hit #1 bestseller status on February 10th. Since March 2018, he's been a radio podcast guest on over 100 shows. His story was featured on Travel Channel's My Horror Story, which originally aired in November 2019. And here he is with us.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. See if I can high enough here. Everyone hear me okay? Okay. I'd like to start this off with it's brief, it's only a couple sentences. It's from the 42nd session of the United Nations General Assembly from September 21st, 1987. And the words are this: cannot swords be turned into plowshares? Can we in all nations not live in peace? In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside, universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask, is not an alien force already among us? Those are the words of Ronald Reagan. He spoke those words about 7 times through the course of his presidency. That was to the biggest audience. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself. I'm 65 years old. And, I think Charles Mary covered most of my bio. I want to be clear from the start. I'm not here to try to convince you of anything. I had no intention of ever writing a book. I had no intention of ever speaking publicly about this topic. I had an experience I had experiences as a child. From age 4, episodically, through about age 11. And then 11 years of peace. Nothing happened. And then in 1977, when I was 22 years old, I made a camping trip to Devil's Den State Park in northwest Arkansas. And it changed my life. My friend and I we didn't stay in the campground. You know, we wanted to be real outdoorsmen, so we dodged the campground. We're gonna find our own space. And we did. We found this, we thought we were in some kind of restricted nature preserve. We trespassed to get back in there. But you know, we didn't think it was a big deal. We weren't gonna burn the forest down or anything. So we ended up camping on this high plateau that was just about level with the tops of the trees of the surrounding forest. And interestingly, I had never been camping in my life. My friend Toby had never been camping in his life. So this was all new to us. And we did all the fun stuff you do when you camp, and had a nice time. And about 9 o'clock in the evening rolls around, and we have our $10 Kmart tent. We got a couple air mattresses, a little bonfire between us, and we're chatting back and forth and just having a nice time. And this sounds cliche, but I swear to you, this is true. And that is that there are, you know, bugs, tree frogs, things in the forest that make noise. And that noise was loud enough that we could barely carry on conversation just 15 minutes earlier. And I noticed that that abruptly stopped, and it was dead silent. The only thing that I could hear was the crackling of campfire. It didn't unnerve me. And I asked my friend, you know, of course he's gonna know. I'm like, Toby, man, is this normal? it's like really still out there, it's really quiet. And he's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. You know, we've been loud and making noise and cutting up. We just quieted them. They'll be back. And I wasn't sure. I was unnerved still. And a few minutes later, we're having some conversation. A few minutes later, he has his head turned to the left and he's fixated on something to the west. And he asked me, hey Terry, were those lights there before? And I'm like, lights? What lights are you talking about? He said, we were in a remote area, there were no lights. And at first I couldn't see because his torso was in the way, and I took a step back and stood up, and on the horizon, on the western horizon, there was a cluster of 3 little bright stars, and they were just too far above the horizon to have been lights from a train or a parking lot or something. And they were dead still, they didn't move. And while we're watching them, you know, we're talking about what they could be, and then they moved. And what they did is they rotated like they were on an axis. And they turned like about 120 degrees and aligned the base of the triangle parallel with the horizon. And then it started to go up. And about that time, I felt this feeling of calm wash over me. And the word dissociated really is pretty accurate. I felt like I was an observer instead of a participant in this event. And as we watched this thing climb into the sky, with this oriented with the 3 stars, until it reached an altitude, maybe, I don't know, 10,000 feet, I have no point of reference. But it reached a point where it leveled out, and from there started a glide plane in our direction. And I knew it was in our direction because we could see 3 lights. The apex of the triangle was pointing at us. And you know, when 2 human beings see something like this, human nature is, you get excited. You say, hey man, you see what I'm seeing? And you know, what is this thing? And you ever seen anything like this before? Could this be a plane? But there was none of it. None of it. There was little conversation and no conversation between us. And I had no fear, and I just watched this thing play out. And it came in and parked. We were on a kind of a triangular shaped meadow, and it came in and parked, for lack of a better word, just parked 3,000 feet over our heads. I'm guessing at the altitude, but I think I'm pretty close. And still I had that feeling of calm wash over me. And I'm going to cut through some stuff here because time is limited. But that transition, that feeling of calm transitioned into sleepy. And you know, sleepy and tired are really 2 different things. And all I wanted to do was go into that tent, lay down and go to sleep. And that's what we did. We go threw our air mattresses in. I didn't bother to take off my boots or my shirt. I threw my air mattress in, I fell on top of it, and I was out. Same with my friend. And sometime during that evening was when they took us. And I woke up the next morning early. In retrospect, it was about an hour before dawn, with these bright flashing lights coming through the canvas of the tent, just lighting it up like a ballpark at night. And I wake up and I'm like, where am I? Oh yeah, I'm camping with Toby. And I see these flashing yellow, white lights, and I'm thinking, yeah, these are the, you know, the overhead lights of a park ranger's truck. They're there to kick us out, right? Because we're trespassing. And I sat up and I noticed that my boots had been unlaced, almost all the way down. And I knew that I didn't leave them that way. I would have gone to bed with them off, or I would have gone to bed with them laced up, but I wouldn't have gone to bed with them like that. And I pulled my boot off, and at this point I'm just annoyed. And my socks are on sideways. And I'm confused. I knew that would never do that. And, you know, the military teaches you to take care of your feet. Right, Les? So I knew that it didn't dawn on me that we had been undressed and undressed. And I asked my friend. My friend is on his knees peeking out of something at the flap of the tent. And he's looking at something. And I'm like, Toby, man, what are you looking at? And he doesn't answer me. He said, I think they're still out there. And I'm like, who's still out there? What is it, park rangers? Who's out there? And he really doesn't give me a good answer. And I got on my knees and I peeked outside of the tent, and that thing that had been 3,000 feet over our heads when we went to bed had descended. It is now just 30 feet over the floor in the meadow. And I looked, and I saw, when I looked closer, during these flashes of lights from the points of the triangle, there were what I first took to be 12, maybe 15 little kids, 3 feet tall, walking around, paired up in the 2s and 3s. And I asked my friend, I said, hey man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And he said, man, those ain't little kids, Terry. Don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us. And that was the beginning of my abduction. And as I said, I had never had any intention of ever publishing a book or speaking about it publicly. But in 2012, I had a routine x-ray of my leg. And they discovered a square structure about the size of your fingernail above my knee with 2 wires attached. And there's no scar, there's no visible way that this thing got into my body. And when I saw that, that brought back memories. What it did was it validated what I already knew. In 1977, they did take us. And in 1987, I had 2 hours of missing time on a motorcycle ride. They took me then too. And this epiphany, this knowing that this thing in my leg, they put their hands on me, changed things. And I had nightmares, and it changed my life. And that's when I decided to face it and write a book about it, speak publicly about it, and I'm glad I did. I didn't for so many years because I worked for the government, I had a good job, and had I wrote this book or made these statements during my career, I'd have been unemployed, no question. And, you know, when I wrote this book and published it, did I lose my friends in the legal community? Yeah, a lot of them called me up and said, man, are you nuts? What are you doing? And I said, I'm telling you the truth. I'm trying to tell the truth without embellishment. And I brought copies of my books today if anyone's interested. That's not a shameless, plot. Anyway, they're available if you'd like a copy for $20. There was a report put out by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And, you know, having read a lot of legislation in my day, having written some legislation in my day, I understand some of this stuff. And I've had a lot of people say, oh, well, that's really, nothing. That there's no disclosure there. One thing I want to point out is the word threat used in the military context has a different meaning than it does in the civilian world. The word threat, and Les may agree with me, implies a threat to national security. Right. So I'm going to start with page 1. I'm just going to read a couple of sentences, but I think these are significant. The scope and assumptions is to submit an intelligence assessment of the threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP. By the way, they use UAP both for the plural and the singular, so it's not UAP, so just clear that up.
Thank you.
And the progress of the Department of Defense Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, UAPTF, has made in understanding this threat. Prior to this, there was a program called ATIP. Anyway, I won't go into that, but they did this before. Page 3 is an executive summary, and just point out a couple of things. Their report focused on a limited sample of events that happened between 2004 and 2021. And they made this statement. Most of the UAP reported probably do represent physical objects, given that a majority of the UAP were registered across multiple sensors to include radar, infrared, electro-optical, weapon seekers, and visual observations. So a lot of this report says, hey, an F-18 could have a defective sensor. This could be a defective sensor read. There are lots of these reports, as you'll see, that were not only identified by the sensor on the aircraft, by the pilot, by the radar man on the ship below, and the aircraft carrier below, and through other instruments. So that's very validating. Again, that's just another sentence. Our analysis of the data supports the construct that if and when individual UAP incidents are resolved, they will fall into one of 5 potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or U.S. industry development programs, foreign adversarial systems, and a catch-all, in quotation marks, called other. You know, and that other, I think back to Project Blue Book, I think back to J. Allen Hynek. That 5% unidentified has been around for decades. We don't need 5%. You know, we just need 1. Just 1. This is significant. UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue and may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. That's a very significant statement. Available reporting largely inconclusive. But there's a couple things here that are kind of compelling. We were able to identify 1 reported UAP with high confidence. We identified the object as a large deflating balloon. Well, they nailed that, didn't they? The others remain unexplained. The analysis was a sample of 144 reports originating from U.S. government sources. Of these, 8 reports involved observations with multiple sensors. Most reports described UAP as objects that interrupted pre-planned training or other military activities. The military does not like to be interrupted. A handful of UAP appeared to demonstrate advanced technology. In 18 incidents described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. Some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. In a number of cases, military aircraft systems processed radio frequency energy associated with the UAP sightings, or whatever that is. Whatever it is, these things weren't made by Boeing. Okay? Coming up on page 6, I'm just about done here. UAP threaten flight safety and possible national security. Said that already. It asked the question, you know, UAP pose a hazard of flight. Could a broader danger some of the systems? Yeah. Collection against U.S. military activities by foreign governments. So it asked the question, could this be foreign governments? You know, is ET working in concert with Russia? You know, Russia has anywhere from 25% to 50% of their budget devoted to what we do. You know, a fraction of what we devote to military defense. China is engaged actively in espionage, trying to catch up with us. And I think, you know, we shouldn't overlook the fact that we do have a fairly robust intelligence community out there that we don't hear about much or hear from much. But I think they know what's going on. I mean, Iran is a possible threat. I don't see it. I think Israel will take care of them with cyber attacks. So the rest of the report deals with the need for additional funding and ongoing study, of course. So nowhere in this report does the United States government say, ET's here, ET's real. But I'm going to tell you, ET is here, and ET is real. And I know, because they've had their hands on it. So keep an open mind, watch the news, and I think we're going to see amazing things in the next 12 months. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Very interesting. Our next speaker is Daniel Allen Jones, and he is the host and producer for The Vortex, a show that explores the mysteries of the world and beyond. Daniel has been researching unexplained phenomena for over a decade and has investigated strange sights, conducted numerous interviews, and provided media coverage for several events. He is also a musician and teaches drums around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. His new book, Mythos, takes a closer look at his personal journey into the unknown and the quest to understand reality. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Charles Mary, and thank you to the video for holding this really awesome event. I think it's good for us to be able to get together on these issues, especially with the recent hype in the media, with the report that's been released here. There's a lot that we could get in here with all the report stuff. I won't sound too much like a broken record, but I would like to get into some of these things. So many different areas to focus on when it comes to this. Honored to be here with each and every one of the other panelists who I've known outside of today, and in their capacity of what they've brought to this table actually, I think is a really good part of what we're doing to show that this isn't not only an isolated phenomenon, but that there are many components to this that help us, give us a more clarity to the picture that we're all trying to understand here with this mystery. But really, without getting into anything else, I'd like to kind of go over who has actually taken in and looked at the full report that, aside from what Terry's, has anyone actually kind of gone through? Well, I'm going to go through these guys, of course. I'm going to read out a few things and just give a little bit of commentary, and a lot like what Terry just did, but I'm going to share a few other areas that I think are also important because this report was not made for the UFO community. This is not made for people who were interested in flying saucers and aliens or anything like that. All the people who were involved with the UFO community, ufology, all this stuff, for the most part, I think objectively found this pretty underwhelming and disappointing, which is not a surprise because I think a lot of people just simply want there to be the acknowledgement of a lot of the things that these guys have already mentioned about. And I think that for anyone that's waiting on any sort of gatekeeper to acknowledge what we call disclosure, it's not going to happen in that way. At least I don't think so. I'm open to surprises, though. I'd like to think that maybe we can get to a new point with what has been set up here, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So to go through everything, as Terry mentioned, this has been put together. This is what was really kind of embedded within the COVID relief fund under the Trump administration last year to be released after 180 days. We finally got to that point, so the scope of this preliminary report, which is just the beginning of hopefully many reports to come, essentially is sharing that this is to submit an intelligence assessment of the threat posed by unidentified aerial phenomena. It's not necessarily the phenomenon itself, but it's also going to be the threat the potential threat that it poses. That's really important to outline, as Terry mentioned earlier. This is not about if aliens are threatening to us per se, rather if the nature of UAP is just by way of being within our airspace a threat. And this can go into many different areas. But also in the progress, the DoD is actually making and understanding the threat is a big deal as well. The assumptions that they've made essentially, it says that the various forms of sensors that register UAP are generally operating correctly and correctly enough to capture real data to allow for initial assessments, but that some UAP may be attributable to sensor anomalies. This is important because it gives us the idea that we may not be able to detect the full array of actual UAP, and that our sensors may only show us certain things, or that our sensors are actually malfunctioning. That is some degree relevant. It's not going to account for, I think, all the totality of UAP, but we're going to actually get into another part which I think is important to acknowledge as well. There are certain things in here which, if you know what you're looking at, I think are pretty indicative that there's a lot more. And also, this is an unclassified public report. This is not the classified report that Congress got, so which I think was about 10 times this 9-page. Just brief little overview. So the executive summary, as Terry mentioned, is the limited amount of high-quality reporting on unidentified aerial phenomena hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions about the nature or intent of UAP. That's absolutely correct. Going through this, I almost thought it paralleled a lot of conjecture you hear in civilian UFO reporting organizations. There's nothing different than what you really hear or see in a lot of these, which is simply that there's a limited amount of information almost in any case. After a decade of looking into this stuff, talking to all sorts of people, military and civilian, almost no one knows anything about this stuff. And the people that do are behind closed doors and are not willing to let go of this easily. Any of the people that do that aren't military or who are considered experiencers, this is in a completely different side of this area, which is not necessarily unrelated, but it's indirectly related to the UFO subject overall. Because not every UFO is an alien spaceship, and so UFOs should not inherently be tied together with the study of alien life. Although that does seem to be a big discrepancy with this issue. And there's a big pop cultural baggage issue with that as well. But this goes on to say that because the reporting lacks sufficient specificity, which is actually extremely important that it says this, it ultimately recognized that a unique tailored reporting process was required to provide sufficient data for analysis of UAP events. What this means is that, for example, if you file a Freedom of Information Act request, FOIA, and you're not specific in your wording, you will get nothing. If you are very specific in your wording, you might get very pertinent information, you might get a lot. I'm thinking that with what we're seeing here, with what this says, it lacks sufficient specificity. Was that there are gatekeepers out there that are holding on to this information that, for whatever reason, due to technicalities or wording, that the UAP task force is left with little to nothing to work with. And I highly doubt, I feel confident that there are probably more than enough of these special access programs, unacknowledged special access programs deeply embedded within, like corporations essentially embedded within military agencies, which are mostly unacknowledged and don't really call to anybody, have their own ability to fund things, essentially have this information. The Air Force has had a lot of this information, and because of the inability for groups like the UAP, ETF to get this, as we'll see in a moment, they're working on a lot of interagency and the process of interagency collecting and gathering of information. So this is a lot here. I think it's important to consider that they're outlining the reason why this report is lacking sufficiency. It's insufficient. There are no case reports. There weren't any in here in the unclassified version that show us that any specific report had multiple sensors used. It talks about that, but it doesn't show of any specific case files, which is incredibly disappointing. I think that there's a huge letdown for the UFO community. But again, this is not tailored for UFO people. This is tailored for the general public to assimilate this information, and I think it's really important to see that this is bigger than just people into UFOs. And it's actually, I think, an initial step in where we're going with this culture. As he said earlier, it also mentions that there are probably, and this is really important, there are probably multiple types of UAP requiring different explanations based on the range of appearances, behaviors described in the available reporting. All of those words are extremely important in how that sentence was put together, because UAP, does not mean one thing. UAP is an umbrella statement that describes a vast array of at least 5, if not 6 different things. They listed 5 in here. There's one that they didn't mention, which has been talked and discussed before. UAP clearly poses a safety threat or a safety or flight issue that may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. Would any of you agree with that statement? I think that that's one of the biggest dichotomies in the UFO culture right now, is that some people think that when we're talking about UFOs, we're essentially dealing with advanced life forms. That's not always the case, although that can be a big part of this issue. A lot of those who fall into that train of thought basically are adverse to the idea that UFOs inherently being, alien or other advanced beings would be a threat to us. that's not the question, that's not really the context that's being used, as Terry was mentioning earlier, when we're talking about a threat. This is a really simple matter of national security, and wherein we're basically dealing with, we don't want to run into stuff in our own sky. We don't want to have things that are out there that are potentially adversarial, that we could see as a complication of flight patterns and all this stuff. Even in the most mundane, conventional sense, UAP poses a threat. That should not be an issue of discrepancy after this report. Although it will be. This is something I think we have to get beyond. There are people out there who adamantly oppose the idea that UFOs are a threat, and I don't necessarily think that the objects themselves intend on being a threat, but it's just by proximity of being within airspace. They're essentially something we have to acknowledge. And the other interesting thing they keep on here, this should be in the fine print, it's something that they include in this statement here that's not in bold. It's the only sentence in this statement that's not in bold that probably should be. It says, some of these steps are resource intensive and would require additional investment. That's their way of saying that they're permanently installing the UAP task force and are looking for additional resources to continue funding, which it will probably get, which will probably end up opening the doors to a number of really incredible opportunities for this area and the momentum invested in this area to continue on. A big part that this talks about, available reporting largely inconclusive because of limited data. That is not just the government, that is across the board for everyone all throughout UFO history. It's always been about limited data. You can have one person say that they know absolutely what the case is, what the deal is, their experiences with it, or what all they're dealing with. But that doesn't help us when it comes to having a unified understanding across the board, socially, culturally, and what we can do to understand what we have to really acknowledge about this phenomenon itself beyond just strange objects in the sky. It implies something, that there's a lot more to what's going on. For even the ability for the government to acknowledge this, it implies something. It's not something that they had to do. They could have been doing all the UAP task force stuff without acknowledging it at all in a classified manner. But because it is unclassified, there's a great deal of transparency at stake here, like Sharon was saying earlier, that really gets into an area of continuity of government, of a motive to show that there is a plan of things to come. And how those will come will all depend on certain things, especially with this issue here, the report. Another important part of this is what Terry was mentioning earlier, that basically during the research, observations occurred but were never captured in formal or informal reporting by the observers. That's always been the case as well. We've never had something, I think, that has been open enough to allow for people to be comfortable in the last 50 years. You look at Project Blue Book, which is 50s and 60s, and even in that, Dr. J. Allen Hynek was, I'm surprised to find, as his one of his cohorts and close working partners with that, Jacques Vallée, found several indications that there were groups working in tandem or in parallel, clandestine to Project Blue Book, that were taking the more serious reports, and then they would disappear after that. So there are definitely, I think, reporting agencies or something to that effect that have been going on in the ilk of ATIP, but that were never acknowledged publicly, and could still be in effect today, that are in some degree a breakaway from modern continuity of government. I think that's a really important issue for compartmentalization. Of course, we talked about the number of reports. A big area that it focuses on, that actually in the colored version shows you, it's got a pink box here. This is super important for anyone who isn't familiar with this. It talks about, it basically just brings it right up there and says UAP collection challenges. And this is something that we have to acknowledge, not just from the government, but from everyone, civilian sectors attempting this work as well. The first line of this, I think, is probably one of the most important lines of the whole document, which is socio-cultural stigmas and censor limitations remain obstacles to challenging data on UAP. That has always been the case. There's always been a stigma with this issue. People will be ridiculed and scrutinized in such a way that they'll lose work opportunities, relationships, friendships, and families become ruined because of this issue, because of the stigma imposed specifically because of, I think, the legitimacy of this issue and how it could affect a lot of things. very hypocritical of the government, and in many ways, I think people could be upset at this, but then again, the government's not one person. You've got many heads butting against each other, which is, I think, how we even got to this point of this document. But that statement right there is, I think, really important. It also talks about how aviators and other personnel have disparagement and attempting to come forward with this. Obviously, they don't want to endure the scrutiny to come, and I think that's understandable why people would never come out of the woodwork unless they felt encouraged with something like this, having a platform or supportive network. And also the possibility that we have new ways to find what they're calling breakthrough aerospace capabilities, which is a reference to adversarial nations that could potentially have something that is on par with our military's technology. We don't know. And like Terry said, it could be any number of things. It could be that that there are alien factions working in tandem with these groups. That's speculation, but I think that it's worth considering that there are a number of possibilities. Another issue here is that it says UAP observations regarding shape, size, and particular propulsion so that there was some clustering of these patterns, and that this is something that they wanted to focus more on, is that there were clusters around testing grounds, training facilities. Others have seen these objects underwater. There's a lot to this, and of course this section also deals with a handful of UAP up here to demonstrate advanced technology. Chris Mellon, who was insider with all of this for a long time, who was part of TTSA until recently, worked in tandem with Elizondo, has repeatedly said this is not some secret U.S. technology, and I am highly skeptical of that because, with the compartmentalization and defense secrecy involved in so many of these special access programs, unacknowledged special access programs, there is too much for one person to know all of whatever program or project. I'd like to think that he's being as truthful as he knows he can be, but even in that, I don't think that we can simply take his word and say that, or anyone like that says this is not by any way, shape, or form the secret project of the government or military. I absolutely think that it could very well be. In many cases, many UAP cases, that's exactly what we're dealing with. Of course, it doesn't account for everything. I think, again, this is something that as it continues on here, shows us that this isn't really just one thing. It goes on to say that, without any discernible means of propulsion, there are some incredible maneuvers being performed, and anything that can demonstrate a signature management, which is essentially, it has intent, it has the ability, it has some form of coherence or intelligence enough so that something is controlling the object. The object is of itself inherently intelligent, or something is controlling it by whatever means. And I think that that is saying right there in this report, I don't know what it says in the classified one that Congress got, but you have to make sense of this in some way. I think that this is really the closest thing in this report that's talking about non-human technology. And it's not, as Terry was saying, it's not outright saying that. It never says that in this document, that aliens are real, extraterrestrial technology. It's here, we've used it. But I think some things can be inferred that, this is directly referring right here to something along the lines that this does not belong to any known or what can be revealed as far as secret programs. Again, I am highly skeptical of that. There is not a breakaway group of exotic capabilities out there. UAP probably lack a single explanation. I highly agree with that. I think that it's important to acknowledge that UAP is not one thing. And it will never be one thing. UAP is, and always will be, just like UFO, an ambiguous umbrella term that is non-specific. We can get specific with it, but I think that because of the non-specificity, as it was relating to earlier, this is why it's so difficult for any intelligence gathering community, agencies or anything that's attempting to do this work, because there are too many. That's why we have to file those reports into at least these 5 things, which Terry mentioned earlier: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or basically these secret programs, like we just mentioned, developmental programs, foreign adversary programs and systems, which would be the same thing but other countries, and then this catch-all bin of other. Now, this is the other area that leans more into the possibility of non-human intelligence, other. I think that it's highly improbable that this is the other bin is just relegated to some filing folder to be stored away that collects dust. I think that those probably get the most credence when, where, and how they can, depending on what information, what resources are available. Which is why there are many different iterations of needing to invest in. Right here it says, we may require additional scientific knowledge to successfully collect on, analyze, and characterize some of what's referred to as these advanced UAP. That is absolutely the case. It always has been. I think that's something that's been known for the greater part of the last century, that the real deal percentage-wise, when it comes to UAP, is not going to be something that is going to come down to the atmospheric phenomenon, clutter, things like that, although we will learn a lot along the way. UAP threaten flight and safety, possible national security issues. Obviously, we talked about that. Obviously, it's something we have to acknowledge in some capacity in the most technical context of those issues. Potential national security challenges. First 4 words of this are the most important. We currently lack data. That's all and it's currently lack data to indicate that UAP are part of a foreign adversary. It's not saying that they aren't. It's just saying that we lack data to conclude that. There are many different things that this report can really get into that I think the classified version does. It continues to say the initial focus will be to employ artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms to cluster and recognize similarities and patterns and features of the data points. As the database accumulates information from known aerial objects such as weather balloons and high altitude or superpressure balloons and wildlife, machine learning can add efficiency by pre-assessing UAP reports to see if those records match similar events already in the database. That's really important because to think of what agencies are out there now or that have been utilizing advanced modes of processing information. I don't know of any that have attempted to use AI to the degree that the U.S. government and military has access to. Not to mention that the U.S. government and military have the highest grade technology available. If these people can't figure out what this is, it's not to say that no one can. Actually, I would oppose that statement, but I would think that it's odd that even with some of the discrepancies that we see in the released cases, like the gimbal footage, the Nimitz encounters, all of these things are really have not had any major justice done on the case reporting. It talks all about how we have multiple sensors picking up these things, but it doesn't show any of that in the unclassified report. This could have been a major step for these agencies to come forward with what they actually have, and they did not. The Air Force, from what I understand, is adamantly, or to some loose degree even, opposed to coinciding with the UAP task force. Not all branches of the military are on board with this. As we said, compartmentalization is a big deal, and this is something I think the UAP task force is looking to do to bridge that gap with what they're calling interagency processing. The other big takeaway, or one of the last things I'll share about this, is that they call other groups out. They call out the FBI, and as they say, detailed analysis of data of the FBI, which was derived from investigations of intrusions of UAP data. They're really looking to provide transparency in a way that I don't think has really ever been done before. So while a lot of people say this was, they're disregarding of it, dismissive of it because it doesn't have substance, it actually says, I think, more than people realize, because again, this is not tailored toward UFO community people. It doesn't say anything about Roswell or the historicity of this subject at all. It really talks about the only reports that they could find sufficient enough data on, which was still incredibly insufficient from 2004 to more recent years. And I think that the problem, what we're dealing with here, and what UAP Task Force is dealing with, is that right here it says on the last page, a detailed description of an interagency process for ensuring timely data collection and centralized analysis of all UAP reporting for federal government, regardless of which service or agency required the information. This right here is attempting to break down the walls of compartmentalization, and that's something that started, or a really big part of it started in '47, right after the whole Roswell incident with the CIA, NSA, FBI, all these alphabet agencies was started that year. Kind of ironic, I would think, but what they're looking to do is to undo a massive intelligence committee and intelligence agency issue, which is going to sort of reset a lot of things for us. I think that this is a multi-pronged, multifaceted issue. It's not about strange objects in the sky. We're dealing with technological issues, medical issues, engineering capabilities. We're dealing with anthropological, psychological, and sociological issues. There are many things at stake here, and I think that what has been done with this report having been released just yesterday is setting the stage for what is to come. In the event that some big announcement is made, there's now a platform to acknowledge that this was set into place. I think that's where this is all headed. I'm not attempting to make any kind of predictions, but I think that simply based on analyzing the patterns, talking to people over the last decade or more, and finding out where everyone has felt this is going from all around, there are some major things coming, and I think that this is a stair-stepping process. They've laid out the foundation for something, I think, to help with a cultural shift in our standard of awareness at the most basic level. This is not going to come from UFO events, not going to come from UFO conferences. This is going to come from what's touching the base of the population and reaching millions of people, which UFO stuff is not doing. Unfortunately, I'm reluctant to say that, but we should not be naive to that the mainstream media, US government and military and official announcements and really big stuff is what is going to really stir up what the basic level of awareness has to be raised to. It's not about convincing the UFO community. These people already said or know or feel like they've had that confirmation for themselves. So this is not tailored for them. This is something that will help raise awareness all around. So I'm excited to see where this can go. I'm still hopeful. Even though this was a big disappointment in many ways, I think there are some hidden gems in there that allude to more. There are many things inferred with this that I think if you understand what is being done through this process, can lead us into the future with new reports. So, I'm glad to continue doing what I can to report on this subject and connect with who I can, where I can, and how we can all get together, because this is not just one group or one person type thing. I think we all have to do what we can to work together to figure out this mystery. And I'm glad and honored to be here with all of you, the other panelists, and hopefully we can figure this thing out together. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for a Q&A, and I'd love for some, and it looks like some hands are up. And why don't you go first?
Sure. So can we get you on microphone, please?
Yeah.
Do you mind? No problem. Stand up, sir.
For the last panelist, with regard to the Nimitz, I think you said, Nimitz incidents or occurrences, could you go into details about that, or what did it have to do with the U.S. Navy?
Yeah, in a nutshell, USS Nimitz is a aircraft carrier. It's a battle group of naval vessels, including what are also known as small boys, so smaller ships. Aircraft carrier is huge, maybe upward of 5,000 people. You also had, along with the Nimitz battle group, what was called the USS Princeton, which maybe had like 400 crew on board, along with the spy radar satellite, very high-end military radar technology used by senior radar analyst Kevin Day, who was the one who sent the pilots up, the F-18 Super Hornets, to get the game or the gun cam footage of the Tic Tac, which has been plastered all over the news. So you have pilots have seen this object, they've tracked it on radar, they have the footage of it, and you have all of these corroborating angles and sensory issues, and it's still something that people will continue to attempt to debunk, that it didn't happen. It was an issue of, I'm seeing something in the cockpit of the F-18s, and even recently Alex Dietrich has come forward, who was one of the female pilots who saw this. And I think this is really monumental to see, like, the military and Navy veterans coming forward. I've interviewed 4 people who were part of the battle group personally, who all of which say that there was not only probably advanced knowledge, but as soon as the incident was over, it wasn't just one of these so-called Tic Tacs, just as you could imagine, so a giant, like, 18-wheeler sized round, no rivets, no obvious visible propulsion, 2 little, like, small hockey stick things at the bottom. Basically, these things were going from about 80,000 feet to sea level in under a second. and they would try to chase him down. Commander Dave Fravor went in his F-18 to go chase one, and they would just move around very effortlessly. And Kevin Day said that they were operating with non-Newtonian physics. So not only that, but they all say that they saw very clear, crisp HD footage of that game, the gun can footage, which has not ever been released. And all of the data tapes were soon taken away by Air Force personnel who landed on the Nimitz to acquire and conceal the data tapes. That's very curious to me that someone knew about that. Someone has those data tapes. Those are out there somewhere. They're trying to subpoena them. And I think that, you know, it's a shame that we in the public haven't seen the actual, I mean, we're looking at a blurry picture and people are scrutinizing it saying, that's an artifact of the camera, it's poor imaging. It has nothing to do with that. Those are all, from what I understand, what these guys have told me, unless they're all liars, which I don't think they are, that these are doctored before they're put out to the public, and that someone actually does know about and has the original footage. But this happened 16 years ago now, in 2004, off the coast of California, near the Catalina Islands. And it's something that just, you know, at the end of 2017, it made the news, and it's been in the headlines ever since. You can see the interviews I've done with the 4 veterans on my YouTube channel, Vortex, and they're all very forthcoming, and they all say that, you know, that the Air Force came and took the tapes, and someone's got it out there. So, I mean, the Air Force knows more than they're letting on. The task force is trying to get them to get, you know, just get on board with all this, and they're very reluctant. So that one is one of probably many cases that we just know about that one. There are so many that we don't know about. We probably won't unless more comes out. So the Nimitz UFO encounter, there's been a great work done by Dave Beatty, who put it together like a documentary on that. I highly recommend checking that out. But yeah, I mean, the Nimitz encounter is one that people are going to beat it like a dead horse and just keep going with it for the next several years probably. But it's something that happened, and I think that it's important to acknowledge there are many different viewpoints. I don't know that it's alien per se. Some of those people that were there seem to think so. I don't know. I don't know that there's enough information to make that assessment. I don't think that it indicates that no UAP are alien in some way, but that some people think that because of the proximity, and that's also what this talks about in the report of this, what are they referring to as range failure. Range failure is essentially an activity when an object interrupts pre-planned training. That's essentially what happened. They weren't planning on encountering. They were out in their battle group as a war game scenario, doing exercises, and then like looking at their radar, thinking that there was a glitch or malfunction. They reset the radar. It's still all there. So he said, let's use it as part of our exercise. Let's send up the pilots, and that's what they saw was a tic-tac sized, or not size, a tic-tac shaped object size of an 18-wheeler essentially, and it outperformed anything that they could do. He said if these things were a threat to us, that it would have been over very soon. So their indication that it wasn't a threatening thing, but that we need to be aware that there are things out there. So yeah, the Nimitz encounter is really, in modern terms, a pretty important one for the public, because that's one of the few we have that they've talked about and released to us.
Thank you.
And I know there's more questions. Yes.
A few months back,
Would you mind, sir, for the stream?
a few months ago, there was David Sheehan, a constitutional lawyer, was interviewed, and he said that we're at the beginning of a 10-year disclosure by the U.S. government about the whole UFO subject. Do you think that's so? And is this the beginning of it?
I know about that statement of Sheehan's, and he is the attorney for Luis Elizondo now, who was head of the ATIP program at Pentagon. And I have also heard that statement actually several years ago from a military insider friend of mine, and who has been very involved with all this. And so the thinking is, and it's been since Truman and Eisenhower, that we came out of World War II and all of this was a little too much for the American people to handle. you know, they handled all the Roswell stuff. By the way, anyone who has not read Colonel Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, this was published in the late 90s, and he was commissioned with handling the crash site at Roswell as well as the bodies. One alien was still alive, I think there were 5 others. And in his book, he even discusses about our military having bases on the moon. And this is a retired colonel with the U.S. Army. So the plan has been to let us, the American public, we're the ones who pay the taxes to pay for all these programs. And yet we are kept more or less in the dark. And the plan has been that they can bring us more and more into the conversation. But there's been a lot of fear about how we will react to that. Will there be financial collapse? Therefore, a soft disclosure, a drip disclosure, it has been the plan, and it's for over 10 years to go on. This is the big historic floodgate opening, which wasn't very much. I mean, to me, it was laughable how they soft-pedaled the entire, aspect of no, we are not alone. But at any rate, there's been a lot of fear about how can we expect the military to protect us if we can't pay the military? And if we have financial collapse, we won't be able to pay the military. So in order for the military to stay in existence, to support us, we have to have a good socioeconomic system going, and we have to not have us, poor little darling human beings, being terrified over the fact that our neighborhood is actually bigger than we thought it was. You know, that we actually have neighbors who we haven't met yet and maybe don't look too much like us, but humanoid enough. As a matter of fact, I've come across so many different looks and types of species, but they are, you know, two arms and legs and a torso, and most of them seem to be more humanoid, and so we can relate to them. But it's a shock to us to be able to accept that our neighborhood is bigger than what we thought it was. So in order to keep the public from being so shocked about it, in order to test just how much we can accept and absorb about our neighborhood, they have gone slowly in this process. So that 10-year program, I've heard from 2 different people, and I would say the attorney for Luis Elizondo is a pretty, Daniel Sheehan is pretty good. He's been a great attorney throughout the years for many great causes. And also just hearing it from other military people. So I give it great credence. I also have heard that we're going to get another report in about another 6 months. So, you know, testing the waters is what it's all about.
One of the other things too is I understand that Congressman Andre Carson from Indiana has said that there will be congressional hearings. And that's a big step. That's a major step. And you can't put those things together very quickly. So I think it'll definitely fall within the 10-year time plan, but I'm sure it's going to go a lot faster than that. I don't think it's going to take 10 years.
I'll just make a quick mention as well that I've met Sheehan, and I agree that there's a plan in place. I don't think it's going to take 10 years, but I think that we're in that process. I think we've been in that process for probably the last close to 10 years, but I don't think that things have played out in a way to allow for certain if this, then, you know, if X, then Y scenarios play out in the way that government plans them. It all depends on certain things, you know, falling into place. And I don't think that certain things have happened to allow for that according to what they're looking to do just yet. But I do think that there is a plan in effect. I think that's what this is a part of, and I think that it'll probably take less than and within the next decade.
I'd like to ask the 4 of you, I know in other countries, I'm thinking of France and Great Britain and I think Colombia, a lot of other countries, they're quite open with their disclosures, and the country did not economically collapse. So what is the difference here? Why do we think that the public can't handle it and that we'll have an economic collapse if we do, if it's disclosed?
Yeah, I'll address that. You know, I don't think,
Yeah.
can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, that's ridiculous. I mean, you know, there was the Belgian flap, 1993, and the Belgian government gave a private corporation free rein to run that investigation. And they worked together in unison. And they've got some great footage, they've got some great radar returns, they've got some amazing stuff. And, you know, it's not, it should be the biggest story in the world, but yeah, their economy didn't collapse. You know, there were no riots in Hong Kong and Tokyo, New York City. It's just silly. Can the United States, people of the United States handle it? Yeah, I think they can just fine.
I'd like to add to that, you know, besides conscious dissidence that's going on in this country, that there's no reason why the people will react in a negative way. I don't think this collapse is valid at all. I think that people will certainly understand, based on the information that's going to be forthcoming, that these entities, whoever they may be, are in a general sense not malevolent. However, having said that, certainly cases like Terry has experienced do happen. You mentioned earlier, Sharon, that there was 80% had positive experiences. You know, we're dealing with multiple types of entities, not just one type. And so their agendas may be different, and that's something we didn't talk about today, what the agenda is of these various entities. And so the bottom line, I think, on all of this is the fact that we need to push forward and continue to try to investigate and understand what's really going on. And the powers to be, okay, don't like it when there's a vacuum and that they don't know what's going on. And I think that's what part of the problem is, why we're not hearing more about this. Is they don't know, they don't understand, and so they'd rather just deny, and therefore bury it as far as they can. They don't want to deal with it, but now they have no choice. So, hooray.
I'll just make a little comment on that. I think that along those lines, not only there are continuing factions within the phenomenon itself, perhaps, but not even, you probably don't even have to get to that point. You can see continuing factions within the government, within the U.S. government. That's why we're having the issues with the report, is that these different branches of the military and the government are butting heads. Some people in the government and military think that the UFO subject is demonic in origin and evil, and that no one should be messing with this. And that gets into a whole other can of worms. But the main thing is that I think this is being utilized as a catalyst to fuel something similar to what we saw with the original space race. But you know, there are people out there who want to monopolize on the UFO issue, and I think that there are factions in the U.S. government who are looking to make that happen, despite other countries and other nations already acknowledging this openly. America's going to treat it like some people in the American government want to treat this like they not only can monopolize this, but utilize it to perpetuate the militarization of space.
I think that's a good point. There was another question out there. If you want to take the microphone, do you mind?
Okay. She's got a switch on. A friend of mine has a question, and the question is, okay, Avi Loeb, who I'm sure this group is familiar with, advocates searching for things that experts were expert over, the aliens might bring to the world. So this is for you, Terry, and maybe also for the panel to, if you, since you have spoken to abductees, you had something in your leg that was placed there by an alien. So was that examined? Was it taken out of your leg? And if so, what can you tell us about that?
I have pictures in the back of my book. You can also go to terrylovelace.com and see the original x-rays. What happened was I had this fingernail-sized structure above my knee and just to the right. And this is relevant. I had been a runner since like 1979. I didn't run marathons, but I run a couple miles a day every day. And I noticed that in the 2-mile mark in my run, every single time there was a spot on my knee that would go completely numb. And that's the spot on the x-ray where underneath that fingernail-sized structure lay. So there had to be some connection between the two. And I felt stunned when I saw the x-rays. Below my leg, there is a floret pattern of bone that's arranged itself in a tic-tac-like, in a floret-shaped pattern. And I've had some doctors tell me that it's this or it's that. I've had radiologists tell me he's never seen anything like it, has no idea what it is. So I just find it odd that I have those two anomalies. The thing below my knee is made out of bone tissue, and no doctor, no surgeon will remove it. I went to, I get all my medical care from the VA. As soon as I saw that x-ray, I made an appointment to see a surgeon, and I went to see him, and he was like, oh, he said, this is cool, yeah, I'll take this out. And I made it clear that I wanted a forensic protocol followed so that once it's removed from my leg, there's a chain of custody, so there's no question about it, was it swapped or switched. And that was in October of 2017. And the surgeon told me that I needed what's called a cardiac clearance letter. The standard of medical care in this country is that, if you're going to do surgery on you, you got to have you have a heart history like I have. I've had a couple heart attacks and a bypass, and you need to have a cardiac clearance letter before they work on you. So I could not get a cardiac clearance letter because of my health, and the cardiologist explained. I saw 5 cardiologists in total. The cardiologist explained it's a risk versus benefit analysis. That thing's been in your leg since probably 1977, and you've had no ill effects. If we cut you open, there's a risk of infection, a risk of a bad adverse reaction from anesthesia, and when you balance the two, and they told me, this lady says, look, I got 50,000 vets out there. They got a piece of metal in their leg, from Afghanistan or Korea, and they want it out of their body as soon as possible too. And the standard of care is if it's there and it's not bothering anybody, leave it alone. So I could not get an American surgeon to do that. I spoke with a surgeon in Tijuana because they have a little different standard of care there, and he was eager to take it out for me. And this is where things get a little weird. Okay, we mentioned non-human entities, and I mentioned that I had contact with non-human entities. In the 3rd week of October 2017, I woke up in my living room. And seated directly across from me was what I took to be a petite Asian woman, dressed in black, with a wig that was kind of askew on her head. It was a human-made wig, but she had a bulbous back to her head. That's why this wig didn't fit. And she was wearing sunglasses that were jammed. She had no ears. She was wearing sunglasses that were jammed up underneath this wig. And we spoke telepathically. And my first thought was, who are you and what the hell are you doing in my living room? And I still had that calm feeling. I was excited, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't ready to grab a gun. This woman's sitting in a non-threatening position, and I didn't consider her to be a threat. And she told me that I shouldn't talk about this, and that the thing above my knee should not be taken out that it can't fall into the hands of terrestrial scientists, and that if I continue with my plan to have it removed surgically, that ET will come and take it out in the middle of the night. On November 17th, 2017, I woke up with bruising at the top of both of my legs, and I had a puncture wound that was deep, and it was, I could pull it apart with my fingers, and it was deep, and it was a big puncture wound on both legs. No blood whatsoever. Neither one of them ever bled. Within 36 hours, there was this pattern that came out with bruising on both legs. I woke up that morning and I told my wife, I think they came and took this thing out of my leg last night. She says, well, you gotta get an x-ray. So that's what I did. I thought, where can I go and get an x-ray? I can't go into a freestanding x-ray clinic and order an x-ray. So I went to see a chiropractor. And what I did was I took copies of my x-rays showing the fingernail shape structure and also showing the anomaly below my knee. So I took those on copy paper with me. And I was going to tell the guy that I told the guy the truth. I waited in line, and finally he calls my name. Okay, what can I do for you? I said, well, I got these wounds above my knee. I thought they'd be a good introduction. And he looks at me and says, how did you get these? I said, I don't know. I woke up with them, which is true. And I told him, I said, Doc, I want to be perfectly honest with you. I think I was abducted by aliens in 1977. They put something in my leg, and I think they came and took it out last night. And he says, all right then. Well, and he's walking me to the door with the elbow, by the elbow. And,
Yes, go.
but you know, yes, follow me. I know chiropractors look at 100 x-rays a week. And I held up these two pieces of copy paper in front of him. And about 3 feet from the door, he stops, and he takes them, and he looks at them, and he says, come with me. And he took me back to his office. He shuts the door, his phone's ringing, people are knocking at the door, and he sets the two x-rays on copy paper in front of me. And I sit down in front of his desk, and he says, tell me about these. Give me the 90-second version. And I did. And I said, I need an x-ray. I want to confirm that this was removed. And he said, okay, I'll write a script for an x-ray for you. I'll pay for your x-ray. All I ask is that you don't use my name or the name of my clinic in your book. So I honored that. I went to the x-ray clinic, and the thing is gone, above my knee. But there's more. I dropped off the x-rays in his office. He calls me later that evening and says, well, did you see your x-rays? And I said, yeah, I saw the thing above my knee, it's gone. And he says, yeah, but did you see they left you something? And I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And back in my book, I have a picture of it, but it's really hard to see because it's pixelated. You really need to look at the x-ray paper, the x-ray film, to see it clearly. Right next to my femur are two tiny wires, maybe a little longer than a quarter inch, parallel to one another. And one of the wires has a slight bend at the tip. And those are not natural. Those don't belong in my leg. And I asked this chiropractor, I said, Doc, let me ask you, you seem like you know a little bit about this topic. If these things are so smart, how could they be so inept as to leave two wires in my body? And he says, you don't get it. They're not inept. They don't make mistakes. He said, what they probably did is give you an upgrade. You know, that's probably the 2017 model, the 1977 model they took out of your leg. And, well, you know, it kind of makes sense. Look at the advancements we made since 1977. So the things below my leg are still there. The square structure is gone, but I still have those two wires and the x-rays to prove it that lie right next to my femur.
So one more question from the panel. So far we've been hearing about these individual experiences of abductees with aliens. And this is maybe some speculation on your part. Why do you think the aliens don't make themselves public to all of us?
I have no idea. I mean, I could speculate all day long, but I honestly don't have a clue. I mean, why did they pick me? I don't know. I really genuinely don't have an answer for it.
It could be like the prime directive, non-intervention, non-interference policy. Although not everyone abides to that, you know, I think that could account for why we have certain anomalous experiences. Of course, that's just speculation, but I think that they're probably, and I agree with the statement that Terry mentioned that was said, there probably aren't a lot of things that are done on the behalf of an advanced group on accident. I think you would probably estimate that most everything that a potential advanced entity or civilization would do is pretty specific with everything that they would do. And I would think that even wondering why we get a crashed UFO or something that would be like an alien spaceship, why would they crash there? Thinking that they have advanced millions or billions of years just to succumb to earthly gravity or something. Doesn't make any sense looking at it from our sense of logic and understanding, but I think that there are ways that other civilizations could operate that are beyond our normal means of being reasonable. And I think that if you look at why you have entity interaction, some people think that it could be related to a genetic issue, could be related to some kind of hereditary issue, blood type. It could be any number of things dealing with how organic material is utilized for medical reasons. There's a big issue with people concerned about what is known as harvesting, trafficking. There are a lot of really incredible and challenging issues when it comes to this area that is just very ambiguous and not very well outlined or well known. You have a lot of incredible stories, but I think that if you look at a broad scope of specific cases and look to find correlating patterns or any themes, and I know that Les, having done a lot of this work with experiencers as well, could probably attest to this, that there are certain themes that stand out that make one wonder, is there any sort of relevance to why certain groups of people have these experiences where others don't seem to at all. So I think there could be something to that.
Well, one of the things I wanted to follow up on that is that there's a retired Israeli general, what's the guy's name?
Time to shed.
Chaim Shed, who wrote a book recently, who said that basically the aliens are not contacting us in general is because we're not ready. We're not ready. And that evidently our governments have these deals with the aliens as well. And so they want to just keep all this, undercover at this point. And it's really interesting how there's so many different types, so many different agendas, but do we make ourselves known to the general populace of dolphins? We take individuals out of the ocean, and tag them, and then we take blood out of them, and then we throw them back, and then a year later we come back and catch the same one and pull them out again and do the same thing. So it's interesting, and we don't have all the answers, believe me, we just don't.
Just real quick, if you want to look up Chaim Shed's story, it's in the Jerusalem Post, dated December 8th, 2020. It's a fascinating read. Look it up if you'd like. It's
Yes.
pretty cool.
Okay, I appreciate very much the audience coming, all of you coming, and the panelists have performed well beyond my expectations, and it's not a performance, it's reality, and as we all know, reality is often stranger than fiction, and I think that we, each one of you had such a unique perspective, and a perspective that educated myself quite a bit, and I hope all of you and all of the viewers on YouTube also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.